Good morning. Thanks again to the BOS, VTU, for inviting all of us. Even if nothing actually does change, at least it's forced all of us to reconsider design process. Maybe we can improve in practice. I have two small comments before I proceed. I'm talking about the sixth semester design. The two things that I wanted to say is that it may be worthwhile, and we've discussed this last week at the office, to think of the design studio both laterally and vertically as being integrated. I don't know how you do that, but I think it's important. So though we are looking at studio today in isolation, I'm looking at the sixth semester, it may be problematic to think of it in isolation. The second thing, and which is more important, which is Professor Bhushan was just saying that earlier, that without good faculty to run the studios, it's difficult to guarantee what comes out of the studio by setting a syllabus, because studio, compared to many of the other subjects, requires inspired faculty. So on that note, and also just a note on what I'm presenting today, I do not have a detailed sort of week by week setup for the studio. I have some general comments about the syllabus that I was given, and I am working within the framework of the syllabus as it exists now. So just to give you an introduction, the background for the sixth semester studio. The existing syllabus has specified 3 primary objectives for the studio and has a brief outline describing the focus of the studio. Also listed are some suggested projects which could be undertaken in the studio. The 3 objectives of the studio are to understand the difference and similarities between institutional goals and architectural goals, to understand creating of spaces for learning, formal, informal, and interactive processes of learning, and the role of the built environment. To understand the role of built environment in therapeutic and nurturing institutions. The course outline suggests that an institutional project, and they've given a list of the kinds of institutional projects you could do, learning, vocational training, or a small campus, be tackled in the semester. The brief clearly articulates the goals of the institution regarding the role of the built environment in its functioning. I didn't understand that, but I'm assuming that this means that the brief, in addition to being a program document, sufficiently describes the abstract goals of the institution and its roles within the larger context. That's a good thing. Case studies be done of similar projects. A special mention is made to limit these case studies to buildings built after 1980 for some reason. There are 2 distinct typologies of campuses, and so now the assumption is made in the outline, course outline, that an institutional project necessarily means that it's a campus. And so there are 2 distinct types of campuses, so specified in the syllabus outline. One type is that which is integrated into the urban fabric at the edges of its boundary, and the other that has ignored the urban fabric. So that's a pretty simple 2 kinds of campuses. And then the project is to be divided into 2 parts. Site planning, so you do a series of exercises to figure out a master plan. So again, the campus thing is sort of emphasized. And then you take 1 or 2 buildings and detail them out as part of the studio. The project has to respond to climatic, environmental, and ecological factors. And then some examples. So the outline also suggests certain kinds of projects, again going back to the comments made earlier about the typology being sort of the overriding condition for the studio outline. So they've said that you could do an engineering college, a medical college, management college, law college, dental college, nursing college, and various other such colleges which you can think up as part of the program. One major project and one minor project over the course of the semester, and the minor project is to be a time problem, which I assume is over the course of 2 or 3 weeks. And then they want a detailing of some kind of a component of the major project. So you could do an entrance lobby, skylight, staircases, So you detail them out, and that becomes part of your set of deliverables. So with that background, I have a few concerns and a few suggestions. Now again, this is very, very sort of generalized. I don't have specific recommendations like my previous colleagues. But I thought it was important to establish some general conditions first. By focusing on a type of building, now of course I had the misconception when I was reading through the whole syllabus that the syllabus was actually focused very much on type. Now that is a misconception. The syllabus does, to give it due credit, set out over the course of 8 semesters a series of issues or conditions that the students deal with, which is perfectly a good way to do this. But there is embedded in each of those studio descriptions this notion of type, that you would take a building of some kind. So even in the objectives listed out in this studio, the first one is a general objective, the establishment of a difference of goals between institutional goals and architectural goals. But the next 2 things about formal, informal learning spaces, etc., starts focusing very clearly onto a typology of building. So by focusing on a type of building, the course does not sufficiently present a hypothesis that will be dealt with over the course of the semester. The question, what is an institution? What is the nature of an institution, is a good place to start. And when I say nature, I'm sort of referring to it as Khan would. So to establish at a very early level this question of the nature of something, it would also be worthwhile to establish early on an arena for our engagement. For instance, to then ask, how does one achieve the nature of an institution in that particular context? And so there are a series of questions. I mean, so the arena of engagement is one. The kind of conditions that you're presented with that context, it sort of impacts the nature of what the thing is. This engagement forms the basis for the studio. The design exercise then focuses not merely on type, but also on ideas of scale, on engagement, social, economic, political, hierarchy, public-private space, challenges, and challenges the student to reflect on these as part of the design development. Syllabus does touch upon this, but I believe the emphasis should be in establishing these larger goals as part of the discussion on the nature of institutions. As part of the course outline, it has been suggested that students look at case studies. I think this really is the core of Design Studio. Unfortunately, we disregard case studies and we think it's plagiarism, and that we don't want to look at, we want to be fresh, new. But I think the case study is the core of the Design Studio, the precedent study, and I think it would be good to add to the building case studies or context case studies a reading list. And so I have prepared a reading list of around 15 essays. And so maybe every week, at the end of the second studio class, it would be good to discuss the readings as a group together. And maybe one of the students presents the readings or a group of them do. Same with the case studies. And when you're doing case studies, it's also important to sort of format it, and I think Bijoy touched upon it a bit, that maybe they draw the thing out rather than pick things out of the internet and then present them. So the way the case study is done is something that needs to be talked about. Once a week, the students could be asked to present the case study, selected readings to the class. This part of the studio work could be done along with the history course. So there could be a sort of lateral connection between the studio, obviously between the history course and the studio, where samples are then investigated together that are pertinent to the studio project. The idea that institution buildings are only those with large campuses and that there are only 2 types of these campuses is far too limiting. The studio should consider the changing nature of institutional buildings in our urban context where land is precious and resources are scarce. So among many ideas of what institutions are, it's interesting now to consider how one makes an institution on a small urban lot on multiple levels and still engage with its context and establish an environment within that captures the essential nature of an institution. Another idea would be to create a dispersed set of small interventions within a dense urban context, changing fundamentally the notion of a centralized institution, engaging instead in a smaller, more localized way. The direction in which the students go requires them to first present a hypothesis about the nature of the institution they propose. Rather than a major and minor time problem project, it would be useful to include a documentation of the area proposed for the design intervention. This work needs to be done in a group, and as part of the findings, an outline program needs to be developed by the students along with the faculty. And the studio faculty should accompany the students on these field trips. Is it possible to consider that there is a connection laterally between the subjects taught in the 6th semester so that the design studio project is informed by the other courses? The connection between studio and the history and theory courses is easy to establish in both courses, and the history course in this semester deals with contemporary issues. It's the same course that I presented in the last BOS meeting, and there are obvious connections between the two that one can establish working with the history faculty. The same is true for theory, because in this semester theory, the second theory course is an outline of literature case studies from, I think all the way from, let me see. Yeah, so from antiquity, so this is a very, very small sort of part of theory, so it takes from antiquity to John Lang via Ruskin and Frampton, so everything in theory is presented in one semester, but nonetheless, it may be worthwhile to say that some of the readings that you have, that you present as part of your studio, are embedded in that theory course. That would be easy to do. The project's taken up as part of the working drawing course, so there is a working drawing subject in this semester. It would be easy enough to take one of these things, entrance, lobby, skylight, staircase, or even a portion of the project that you are proposing, and develop that. And I think a lot of schools already do that, to take some part of your studio project and make and look at that in detail as how you would make working drawings. Links to the other courses, though, are a bit more tenuous. So structures deals mostly with vertical, so gravity, seismic, etc., lateral loads. Building construction deals mostly with large span roofs and steel structures. You could consider maybe that steel was mandated as some of the, but that's problematic, because maybe when you do define a hypothesis for your project, I think material comes as a result of that. But it's difficult to do now because the syllabus hasn't been structured in that way, but it is important, I think, to think about these lateral and vertical connections. And services deals mostly with sound issues. Again, the project could have something to do with that. And to close, I think we must begin to see architects, or the work of an architect, as being an instigator or a provocator in some sense, defining the nature of engagement with the city through the articulation of the program and its relationship with the context. Studio must provoke students to define clearly their agenda and to think of architecture as an active, live engagement rather than a passive and inert one. And the way to do that is to stop thinking about architectural studio projects as types, and to force students to make a commitment on a hypothesis about a condition of existence. How do you occupy, how do you exist in a certain context? And this goes all the way to thesis as well, about how do you make a hypothesis and how do you establish, rather than saying that you're doing a building type. So that's all I have. Thank you.